Hello everyone, welcome back to Extract the Fact. I'm your host, Adam Israelovitz. So today we're going to be looking at another social issue. It's Friday, so we're going to kind of wrap up that with a social issue that a lot of people discuss. It's a frequent topic in the news media, and I think it should be gone over more specifically in depth today. We see on mainstream outlets like Fox News, CNN, MSNBC, all these outlets always have this topic as a primary point of discussion, and it causes a lot of polarization within the news media. So I think it's interesting to dive deep in. And it inflames a lot of historical tension, and inflames a lot of cultural tension, and a lot of different opinions of what heritage we should represent in our society. So I think it's interesting to examine today. And that's going to be, should states be allowed to display Confederate statues and Confederate flags on public property? So there's a lot of factors at play here. And this is a deeply, deeply divisive issue. So on an online poll from isidewith.com, it is actually a 50-50 split. And this is a poll with over 2.3 million respondents on each side. So that's just about 5 million respondents in total. And 2.3 million on each side is a little over that mark, but it is very close. This is an issue that throughout across the country, we kind of see this cultural bond to the South, but also a recognition of past atrocities and how they compare and contrast one another. And this issue is originally inflamed after the Charleston massacre, where a white supremacist, a racist terrorist, murdered 9 African Americans in a African American church in Charleston, South Carolina, and the Confederate flag in the state house there in South Carolina, the state legislature, was still flying. So that rubbed people the wrong way, many people the wrong way, and the flag was later removed there, but we still have issues today. Should Confederate statues be kept? Should names of Confederate leaders be still placed on schools? There was an issue in the House of Representatives in June of 2016 where there was an issue flying the Confederate flag over a military cemetery and whether we should be doing that or not. So there are a lot of different instances, mainly revolving around the Confederate flag and Confederate statues. So we're going to examine that today. So first I'll argue that the flag should remain and Confederate statues should remain in places that they are today, and then we'll flip it over and say, yes, the flag actually and the statues actually should be banned. So first we'll argue they should be kept. So a strong talking point from this group is many people of this group will say, well, we should not erase history. It is important to remember our ancestors, our culture, and our heritage, because that makes us who we are. Of course, and nobody denies this on either side, of course there are parts of the Confederacy that were horrible, and we will get into that and examine that later, and everybody knows that. But at the same time, those atrocities should be learned those atrocities should be taken with a learning experience. So instead of kind of hiding the history and kind of living in the present and not accepting our past transgressions, we should remember history, and we have to learn from history. So there's a saying, if we erase history, history can be repeated. So that's why in Germany, there's always a strong emphasis on Holocaust remembrance and always remembering their past so they don't have to repeat it in the future. And this is what some of the arguments today say. If we have a constant reminder of the atrocities of the Confederacy, then we can reform our society and make sure that instance never happens again. There's also the idea of freedom of expression, and representation and kind of the ode to the past. So it's a state right to represent whatever flag they choose to represent in their state legislature and their state government property. So for example, for the South Carolina law, the federal government cannot come in and remove the flag. It's a state right. Many people will see it, and many people of the argument that these Confederate statues and monuments and flags should remain is saying, well, it's federal government intrusion into a clear matter of states' rights. It's clearly the property of the state, and there's no right for the federal government to come in and say what flag we should be doing, how we should take down our statue. All these little things that federal government should not be involved in is kind of a key proponent of their argument. In addition, the flag is on public property from the state. So and because the job of our government is to represent the people, and the job of the state is to represent the people of that particular state, many people think, well, then shouldn't states' residents should vote on whether Confederate statues should be kept, whether Confederate flags should be kept. Not the federal government kind of snapping their finger and saying, hey, we're going to remove it now. It should be a state-run, civilian-driven effort and decided based on a democratic scale from people within the South instead of the federal government in Washington. This is retrieved from the New York Times debate pages. It's an editorial online that they have contributors write their own mini editorials. And this is from Ben Jones, who is the leader of Heritage for Confederate Veterans. He also was an actor in the 80s, and he had a Confederate flag in his TV show. And he said, racists in the KKK, for example, have adopted the American, and this is not a quote, but I'm paraphrasing here. Racists in the KKK, for example, have adopted the American flag and the Christian flag. We see that to this day, although the KKK has significantly lapsed in terms of their influence. They still adopted the American flag and the Christian flag as these nationalistic symbols of their pride, as messages of their twisted ideology. But are we going to ban the American flag and the Christian cross because the KKK is using them? Obviously, KKK is a horrific organization, but just because they're using something, does that mean we should ban it across the board? So that is another common argument for this camp. Now, if we flip it over and we're saying, yes, actually the flag should be banned, statues should be banned, one core argument is that government should be held and is held to a higher responsibility than ordinary citizens. Of course, if you're an ordinary citizen, you can have whatever flag you choose to have. That's freedom of speech. But government should be held to a higher standard because they represent us. They represent us in the international world. They represent our states. They represent our interests. Government should be held to a higher responsibility. And citizens could be free to hang whatever bad decisions they want on their walls. But government should be make smarter decisions when it comes to symbolism in their society, and that is from a CNN editorial. Our governments have the power to select their own speech, and they should use this symbolic power wisely since they speak for their constituents. That's, again, CNN editorial writing. And then if we address the Confederacy as itself, many people like to paint the Confederacy as just the thing of, oh, it's fighting for states' rights. They seceded, they were putting their interests and putting their state before the pride of the Union. They looked at their own self-interest and said, hey, we want to take a stand for our states' rights. But that is a myth, according to the Washington Post. And the Washington Post says the Confederacy was a brutal and oppressive regime, even aside from slavery. So obviously everybody knows the atrocities of slavery, but if we look on a deeper level, we can see that the Confederacy had a terrible record on civil liberties, considerably worse than the Union during the Civil War. Now, if people dismiss the Confederacy as just fighting for states' rights and they ignore the slavery portion, they refer us to Vice President Alexander Stephens, who was under Confederate President Davis at the time, who called slavery, quote, the cornerstone of the Confederacy. So obviously, if the flag, many people of this argument would say, if the flag represents, as the vice president would say, a cornerstone of slavery, that is not something we should be flying in the 21st century. We can remember history and hope we don't have to repeat it, but that doesn't mean flying a flag and representing statues, glorifying these Confederate leaders. So there you have it. That was our last social issue of the week. I think social issues are important to cover because sometimes they are not understood in American politics and American society. Many people rely on pure emotion when they're looking at these social issues, but it's important to look at, one, the constitutionality, the legality, and then other impacts. So social implications have cultural underpinnings, underpinnings from heritage, economic reasons, political ramifications. So all of these things go into social decisions, and sometimes we are too quick to base on just knee-jerk reactions from emotion. But I think this is an interesting topic. I think all social issues are really interesting topics, and I'm curious to see what you guys say. So subscribe, like, and comment. Thanks.